Welcome back to Trust Your Oats. Over the last 3 episodes, we've traveled from the microscopic world of celiac science down into the living soil of regenerative farms and out onto the track with elite athletes. We've talked about how oats are grown, how they heal, and how they fuel. But today, we're bringing it all home, literally. We're walking through the front door, tying on an apron, and stepping into the kitchen. For most people, oats mean one thing: a hot bowl of breakfast cereal on a cold morning, maybe with a little brown sugar, maybe some berries. And while there is absolutely nothing wrong with a classic bowl of oatmeal, treating oats as just a breakfast cereal is like owning a sports car and only driving it in a school zone. Oats are one of the most versatile, dynamic, and scientifically fascinating ingredients in the culinary world. Today, we're going to unlock that potential. We're going to talk about the chemistry of gluten-free baking, the secret to savory oat dishes, and how to transform this humble grain into everything from creamy risotto to the perfect muffin. This is Trust the Kitchen. Before we start cooking, we need to understand our ingredients. If you walk down the cereal aisle at your local grocery store, you'll see steel-cut oats, old-fashioned rolled oats, quick oats, and instant oats. It can be confusing, but here's the secret. They all start as the exact same thing. They all begin as an oat groat. When oats are harvested from the field, they have a tough, inedible outer shell called a hull. Once that hull is removed, what's left is the groat. And the groat is a nutritional powerhouse. It contains 3 distinct parts: the bran, which holds the fiber and antioxidants, the endosperm, which holds the starchy carbohydrates and protein, and the germ, which holds the healthy fats and vitamins. Every type of oat you buy, whether it takes 30 minutes to cook or 3, contains all 3 of those parts. They are all 100% whole grain. The only difference is how they are processed. Steel-cut oats are simply whole oat groats that have been chopped into 2 or 3 smaller pieces with a steel blade. Because they are thick and dense, they take about 15 to 30 minutes to cook. They have a chewy, hearty texture and a deeply nutty flavor. Rolled oats, often called old-fashioned oats, take those same groats, steam them to make them soft, and then run them through heavy rollers to flatten them out. Because they are flattened and partially cooked by the steam, they cook much faster in your kitchen, usually in about 5 minutes. Quick oats are just rolled oats that have been steamed a little longer and rolled a little thinner. And instant oats are rolled incredibly thin and fully pre-cooked before they are dried, which is why you only need to add hot water. From a culinary perspective, this means you have a spectrum of textures to play with. You have the robust chew of steel cut, the creamy versatility of rolled, and the rapid absorption of quick oats. Now let's talk about baking. If you are living a gluten-free lifestyle, you know that baking can be a minefield. Wheat flour is incredibly forgiving because it contains gluten. When you mix wheat flour with water and knead it, those gluten proteins, gliadin and glutenin, form an elastic, stretchy network. That network traps air bubbles from yeast or baking powder, which is what makes bread rise and gives cakes their fluffy structure. Oat flour does not have gluten. It will never form that stretchy network. But what it lacks in elasticity, it makes up for in flavor and tenderness. Oat flour has a naturally sweet, toasted flavor that elevates baked goods in a way that plain white rice flour simply cannot. And chemically, it behaves very differently than wheat. Oat flour has about 2 to 4 times the fat content of standard white wheat flour. In baking, fat equals tenderness. When you bake with oat flour, you get a crumb that is incredibly moist, soft, and tender. But because it lacks gluten, you have to follow a few rules. First, the substitution ratio. Oat flour is significantly lighter and less dense than wheat flour. If a recipe calls for 1 cup of regular all-purpose flour, you cannot just swap in 1 cup of oat flour. The official recommendation from culinary experts is to use 1 1/4 cups of oat flour for every 1 cup of wheat flour. Second, you need a binder. Without gluten to hold things together, 100% oat flour baked goods can become crumbly. This is where xanthan gum comes in. Xanthan gum is a natural carbohydrate that mimics the binding properties of gluten. For things like cookies and bars, you only need about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of xanthan gum per cup of gluten-free flour. For cakes and muffins, use a 1/2 teaspoon. And here is my favorite kitchen hack. You don't need to buy expensive bags of oat flour. If you have a blender or a food processor and a bag of certified gluten-free rolled oats, you can make it yourself. Just pulse the rolled oats until they form a fine powder. 1 1/4 cups of rolled oats will yield exactly 1 cup of fresh oat flour. So we've conquered baking. Now let's talk about dinner. For centuries, particularly in places like Scotland and Ireland, oats were not just a sweet breakfast food, they were a savory staple. They were cooked with broth, served alongside meats, and used to thicken stews. We've lost that tradition in modern America, but it is time to bring it back. Let's look at steel-cut oats. When you slow-cook steel-cut oats, they undergo a process called starch gelatinization. The starch granules absorb liquid, swell, and release a creamy, viscous gel, while the intact bran keeps the center of the oat chewy and al dente. If that sounds familiar, it's because it is the exact same culinary science behind arborio rice in a traditional Italian risotto. You can make a spectacular, fiber-rich risotto using steel-cut oats. You toast the dry oats in a pan with a little olive oil and diced onions. Then you slowly ladle in warm chicken or vegetable broth, stirring constantly. The oats release their starches, creating a rich, creamy sauce. Finish it with some sautéed mushrooms, fresh thyme, and a handful of Parmesan, or a dairy-free alternative, and you have a savory, restaurant-quality dinner that is packed with whole grain nutrition. But the savory applications don't stop there. Rolled oats make an incredible gluten-free binder for meatballs or meatloaf, absorbing the juices and keeping the meat tender. You can pulse rolled oats in a food processor with some garlic powder, paprika, and salt to create a crispy, gluten-free breading for baked chicken or fish. Oats are a blank canvas. They absorb the flavors of whatever you cook them with. If you cook them with cinnamon and maple syrup, they are breakfast. If you cook them with garlic, broth, and herbs, they are dinner. Finally, we have to talk about the trend that has taken the culinary world by storm: overnight oats. The concept is simple. Instead of cooking rolled oats with heat, you soak them in milk or a dairy-free alternative overnight in the refrigerator. The oats absorb the liquid, soften, and create a thick, pudding-like texture by morning. But there is actually some fascinating science happening in that mason jar. When you eat raw or cold-soaked oats, you are consuming a higher amount of something called resistant starch. Resistant starch is exactly what it sounds like: a type of carbohydrate that resists digestion in your stomach and small intestine. Instead, it passes all the way down into your large intestine intact. Once it gets there, it acts as a prebiotic. It becomes food for the beneficial bacteria living in your gut microbiome. As those bacteria ferment the resistant starch, they produce short-chain fatty acids that reduce inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and keep your digestive system incredibly healthy. So not only are overnight oats convenient, allowing you to meal prep a week's worth of breakfasts in 10 minutes, but they are also a targeted delivery system for gut health. And if you want to take your oat game to the absolute next level, you can use those same rolled oats to make your own oat milk. The ratio is simple: 1 cup of rolled oats to 4 cups of ice-cold water. Blend it for exactly 30 to 45 seconds, no longer, or it will become slimy, and strain it through a clean t-shirt or a nut milk bag. Add a pinch of salt and a splash of vanilla, and you have fresh, preservative-free oat milk for pennies a glass. The kitchen is a place of transformation. It's where raw ingredients become nourishment, where recipes become traditions, and where food becomes connection. When you start with an ingredient you can trust, like Purity Protocol oats that have been protected from seed to shelf, you aren't just cooking, you are honoring the soil it was grown in, the farmers who tended it, and the body that will use it for fuel. Whether you are baking a batch of gluten-free muffins for your kids, stirring a pot of savory oat risotto for dinner, or just enjoying a simple, perfect bowl of oatmeal, I hope you feel empowered to experiment. I hope you feel inspired to bring this incredible grain into every corner of your kitchen. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Season 2 of Trust Your Oats. From the science of celiac disease, to the regenerative soil of our farms, to the fuel of elite athletes, and finally, to the heart of your home. Stay healthy, stay curious, and as always, trust your oats.